Here we go. Okie dokie. Well, thanks everybody to coming to Ask the Experts. We have two folks from Great Lakes Pigeon Rescue today. Hava Saunier, the president, is going to be coming a little bit later. And we have Christina, I don't know how to pronounce your last name.
Peachy.
Okay, Peachy. And you're the medical care director?
No, I'm the shelter director.
Shelter director. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then we have, where'd you go? Where'd you go? Where'd you go? Where'd she go? There's Lisa. And also Faye is also a dove expert from both volunteers with Palomacy for a long time. And we have Nicole and Chris, who I'm going to call some experts because they've really jumped in really big time as Palomacy volunteers. And I expect other folks will be coming soon. But I wanted to open up the floor with a question from the last Ask the Experts that didn't get answered. We didn't get a chance to answer it. And that is, how do we interact with veterinarians whose first inclination is to euthanize? What do we say? What would be a good, and the question really was, what would be a good response, like a good, concise response? And of course, it depends on, obviously, the circumstance, but I'm thinking there might be a good sort of stock answer to start off a conversation with a veterinarian who wants to go with euthanasia. Any thoughts from anybody? And this is open to everybody, by the way. This is a forum, so feel free to chime in. Jill, have you had that problem going to any vets?
I'm sorry,
Oh, you're going in and out. I think your audio's going in and out. We can't hear you. Do you have any earbuds? That might help if you go in with earbuds.
For some reason, when I'm on Zoom, this is the only meeting app that cuts out and says my connection is unstable sometimes. So just bear with me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
So you're asking me to answer, I'll answer that question.
Well, yeah, no, I'm wondering, we don't have that experience with Medical Center for Birds, but I'm wondering whether you've had that experience elsewhere.
Sometimes with new doctors, we do, depending on how long they've been there.
Interesting, even though it's a bird hospital.
Yeah, I mean, doctors that haven't dealt with pigeons and primarily with parrots are often, not often, but can be quick to talk about quality of life. Just had that happen recently, and I just say, nope, we're not going there yet. And I tell them about the wonderful saying Elizabeth came up with is, we don't start with euthanasia.
Right.
The happiness quality of life criteria for pigeons is different than other birds. They can adapt well because they're basically, even the ferals have been domesticated. So they're all used to people, and they all can, it depends on their, of course, pain and discomfort would be a huge factor for me, but things like not walking, not flying, not a problem. Not
right. Yeah, we know that. Yeah.
Figure that out. And sometimes it takes months. I just recently had a head trauma pigeon come in, took her months to learn how to self-feed again. And I just took her away. She's been in the aviary for about 5 days. I was previously bringing her in every night so she can sort of eat and drink up, she's gained weight. She says the fattest she's ever been, and she's been out there for 5 days. She doesn't fly. She has very limited vision. She walks in circles. She's very neurological. but she's living her life and she's doing fine.
Mhm.
Even if she had to come inside and live, we would deal with that. We would, she would acclimate.
Yeah, they're much more, I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're much more adaptable than parrots can be.
Yeah,
I
I
would
don't,
say.
I have nothing to compare it to because I've never had
But
parrots.
Christina does. Christina Peachy, what would you say to this
Yeah,
question?
that's a good point.
In regards to pigeons or parrots?
Well, both. I mean,
The comparison.
we were making a comparison. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's
the
valid.
comparison, yeah, pigeons I've learned, you basically forget everything you know about like bird care, because you know everyone's used to parrots and stuff like that. Parrots are, you know, they could get a scrape and then they're dying, you know, they're really fragile. I don't know how else to really describe it, but pigeons can, you know, we get pigeons with terrible wounds, you know, organs exposed, broken legs, you know, dangling appendages and crop ruptures, and they're bright and alert. You wouldn't know anything was wrong, you know. Parrots, I would definitely say it's totally different. It's like a 180 from pigeon healthcare.
I did not know that. I mean, I knew that they had behavioral needs, but I did not know that their health was as fragile as that.
Oh yeah, if you it sounds really silly to say it, but it's kind of true. If you give a parrot like the wrong diet, you know, they're at risk for like liver failure and dying. Pigeons, you know, they eat junk because they're, you know, in the cities, they eat pizza, cigarette butts, you know, and I don't know, it's definitely been a learning experience ever
Okay.
since I've been here.
Okay, great. I think, you know, we don't start with euthanasia is a really great, you know, sentence to have, but forget everything you know about bird care is also really good, right? You go into a vet, forget everything you know about bird care. Pigeons are different.
Exactly. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting that you know, I've learned that the not walking is something that pigeons can be happy with. Not flying is definitely something they can be happy with. But, you know, when we think about them not feeding, that you have to feed them, they're not self-feeding, but we can get them to, right? It's not a death sentence if they're not.
But that's also not, that's not I mean,
Right,
the
that's why I'm saying it's not necessarily a concern.
no, and it doesn't, Fleetwood, the pigeon, the little roller that had the whole top beak missing, he was hand fed every day, you know, and he learned how to eat. I have a friend that has, that feeds a crossbill every day. They learn how to be fed, and they adapt to or we adapt in Joan's case. Her pigeon has taught her how he would like to eat. We do it all the time. If that's the rest of their lives, that's fine. If not, they can most of the time learn on their own. You know, it's, as long as they get fed, they're happy. They, you know, they're the huge concern for me is enough love and attention.
Mm,
Everything else we can work around.
mm.
And of
Well,
course,
they do amazingly with love and attention. That's
oh,
the thing, you know.
yeah, I mean,
They get that, they
oh, sure, they do. And
flourish.
yeah, they just need that connection. Um, but you know, and like I said, if they were in discomfort or pain, you know, I mean, I have arthritic bird. I have a 15-year-old feral right now that who can't walk at all. She's happy on her heating pad and with all the safflower she can eat. That's fine with me. She's 15. She's whatever, you know, she's comfortable. She's eating. Uh, we're just taking it day by day. So, you know, that's each one is an individual.
Yeah.
Well, I think Jill, that's the key there, right? Each one is an individual. And you can't just say this pigeon came in with this, so therefore, you know, you're wasting your time and your money. I like to think of, you know, and I am a nurse, but I like to think of pigeons more like people, and in the way that, like, if you had a person that wasn't eating, you're not going to kill them right away or just let them die, right? You're going to feed them until either they can recover or they can say, like Roger Ebert, like, this is fine. I won't ever eat again. I'm cool. I still can write. I still can enjoy movies or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And, I think that that's profoundly true of pigeons and
Mhm.
also doves, because I love them. And I just think that it's kind of just trying to get people to kind of shift their perspective, right? Like, if your kid was in an accident and their organs were hanging out, you wouldn't be like, oh, well,
Euthanize.
right? So you kind of have to like shift the thought process to like, maybe you're coming from a place of speciesism, in your diagnosis, or in kind of like, what is this internal bias that you have, and kind of think about it a little bit differently.
Hmm. Elizabeth says a good question would, in response to that, would be why? Please tell me more why euthanasia.
I was going to say the same thing. I like to pick people's brains, and whenever our vet mentions something like that, I always ask, can you tell me why, what makes you say that? Like, what are your concerns, or why is that like your very first recommendation?
Mhm.
And he knows we're a sanctuary and we have a limited budget, so he's more concerned about what we're capable of taking care of at a time. If we have 20 special needs birds or 50, he's trying to help us basically, like, which ones are really worth saving, putting your time and investment and money into,
Hmm.
things like that. So, it's definitely something to think about sometimes.
Right. So
Yeah.
sometimes the vet is trying to help. Well, he's always trying to help, right? But he's trying to help, and he does know what you're doing, but ultimately that's your decision about whether you can handle the animal or not, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not that he doesn't have knowledge about pigeons. It should be more of a you should be more in charge,
Right.
probably in all cases, right? So okay. Next question is from Rose Jensen, who is not on the call. She wanted to ask a question in advance. She says, I would love to know why some groups of doves get along and others don't, and what might be done to turn down the naughty behavior by the boys when their cages are open. She says she has a couple and each have their own cage, and if the boys are out together, they are terribly mean. And if the girls are out, they terrorize them and try to force themselves on them. So she's talking about a specific situation for, in her case, about their dove family. So each couple has their own cage in their large great room. So the boys come out and they're mean to each other, I'm guessing. And then if the girls are out, they're bothering the girls. So they're being very territorial is what I'm hearing. And I don't have an answer.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I thought of this because I got the question in advance.
Yes.
Yeah. So with Rose, her birds don't have access to each other all the time.
Oh.
So it's going to be extra exciting when they're let out
Oh.
and they get to have access. And so I think.
Oh. Yeah. So Jill, you're frozen at the moment, but yeah, that's a great point. So actually giving them more time out together.
Yeah, because they have a
Sorry.
lot, well, not every dove, but a lot of dove has a lot of, so lots of my doves have a lot of energy.
Mhm.
They're just
Yeah.
like nonstop, they're
Yeah.
type A personality, whatever. And then
Mm.
when they do get an opportunity to be out with everybody, they're a lot. We all have our
Mhm.
friends who are a lot. I just got out of the pandemic and I'm a lot. And I think that if they're all in their cages all day long and they finally get to break out, and it's like
Yeah.
finally guys' night out, and then they have all this energy that they haven't been able to burn, and
Yeah.
and they're all individuals too. So some are going to be more, excited and aggressive. And like one of my old doves, Jackpot, my old fosters, like he was just a nut job. Like you just couldn't leave him around. He just got in everybody's business and was just, harassing everybody, and he just loved it. Like he just loved it. And then he got really sick, and I thought, oh, this is terrible. And then he pulled through, and then he was finally better. I'm like, oh, maybe he'll change his ways. And he was just as big an asshole after he got better again. And he loved it. He just loved going and harassing everyone. And that was
Right.
just his personality. I mean, period. That's who he was.
Would you suggest that rows have their doves out much longer?
Mhm.
Yeah.
If they can, you know, and I wonder if also they can find some other way to keep the doves busier, right? And I'm sure they do a great job at it, but like I like when I have a really busy dove, one of the things I like to do is I just take their nest apart more frequently so that they have to rebuild it, so that they have to stay busy.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's
I
a good
hate
idea,
doing it
yeah.
because the nests are so beautiful, but sometimes
No,
you just
but yeah,
you got to
right.
keep them busy. They got to have a job. You know,
Right.
they need something to do. And if they don't have something to do, then they're going to be just creating drama. You know, we work with people like that. We know that, you know, so you just got to keep them busy.
I wonder how often they would do that. I guess it would be a good suggestion to give them is to try and take the nest apart, try and have them out longer with or with the girls. Do you think the boys should be out by themselves for a longer period, or they should all be out together? Even though she says they're driving the girls.
It's hard to say. One of the things that I like to do, and I'm very privileged because I have a room that's dedicated to my birds, and I also have a little aviary, which is just an aviary I use in the daytime. And so sometimes I just go, okay, girls' day out, and I just put all the girls outside and leave the guys inside, or I take all the guys outside, and I separate it all up. So then at the end of the day, there's kind of like this kind of how you are at the end of the workday, either really cranky or like really grateful, one or the other, but it kind of mixes up their day. But I mean,
yeah.
that's me having a lot of space that I, you know, can do that in.
Right.
But I feel like it's fine to change it up and separate them out based on the sexes. I would let all the girls out and leave the guys in, and then switch it up and let all the guys out and let the girls have some, you know, alone time where they can't be harassed.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, underemployment. I think, yeah, having more space to get them to roam around and definitely gets their brain working, you know, because they're in an unfamiliar space, or they're just in a space that they haven't been in a couple of weeks or whatever. Is going to stimulate them and get them to use up some of their energy just by the fact of being in that space. Okay, great. I can get back to Rose about that. I'm sorry that she's not on the call right now. So those were the only two questions I wanted to bring up. We did have a great suggestion from someone to talk about safety with birds. How do we bring them in and out of aviaries safely? How do we handle them safely? So maybe we can start with that. And I'd love to hear everybody's opinions, any challenges people have. I know I've experienced problems with safety in the past. I have had a bird get out. I know other people who I consider experts have had a bird get out. So it can be challenging when a bird wants to just zoom right past you. What are the things we can do to make sure that that becomes a zero time occurrence? And I know the things that I know are to, like, ideally, probably if you have an aviary, is to have a double entrance. And I know people don't have the room for that, but I think that's probably the ideal. That's certainly the standard at a zoo, for example, is you have a double entrance. And the second thing would be maybe putting a long cloth over your entrance door. So you go under the cloth, you open the door.
Or you can have one of those, you know, the magnetized screen,
Or a
either
magnetized screen.
right inside or right outside your door, depending on how. I mean, I would assume most, if you have a single door, it's going to swing out. So you want to have a magnetized screen right in, you know, inside, just as a second layer of protection, in case there's someone that you can't see, because it's hard to see everybody, you know, when you're coming into an aviary. If you have more than 5, 6 birds, it's hard to see where everybody is.
I know there's also when they're in carriers, that can be a problem. You know, trying to handle a bird that wants to get out of a carrier and making sure that's done safely. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. I know Elizabeth has given me a tip, which is to use your body very, very deliberately as a brake so that they just don't have an opportunity. You have to use your body as a shield right up against the carrier. Any thoughts from anybody about that? We could also think about safety from other animals that are in the household. Safety when we're taking them out for a walk.
Can I chime in?
Of course.
So yesterday I went to rescue a dove, pick up a dove in Walnut Creek, and she got away from me. It's not the first time this has happened. I haven't had another dove get away from me before. This one I feel like was preventable. It was a weird situation. It was a rickety old. Can you hear me? Nobody.
We can hear you. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It was a rickety old, like, octagon aviary that was on sort of dilapidated bricks. So I couldn't get, what I really wanted to do was get in it and have him shut the door. And he said, no, that's not safe. I said, well, I feel like we're going to lose her. I told him this and we were on a time constraint, right? So the opening was probably about 3 by 2 in a small aviary. And he says, no, we've left the door open many times and she just doesn't want to go out. And I said, well, I'm not comfortable with that. And I said, the second I reached my hand, I just knew, you know what, I'm still learning things, and I can off because I really should have asked him to grab a towel. We could have tacked it up. I could have gone underneath and probably gotten her, although I couldn't reach to the back. There's all sorts of, it was just a really awful situation. And he had 10 minutes, he had to get to work. He was in a hurry.
So stressors on the
stressors, time constraints, somebody else's rules and property.
Right.
Then
I want to acknowledge that it feels terrible when it happens.
It's awful. It's
awful. Yeah.
It's just such a helpless, awful feeling.
Right.
He was so understanding, and he checked in with me twice afterwards.
Well, that's nice.
I mean, I told him, please leave the cage open so she could, but anyways, so I feel like that could have been lesson learned. I should have just insisted, if you don't have the time, then I'll come back. It was an hour and a half away from me too, so I traveled.
Yeah, right. So maybe making a 5-minute assessment beforehand,
right,
as a rule, asking yourself certain questions and just sort of stepping back for a second and giving yourself that space to make an assessment. What do I need here to do this safely?
And trusting yourself and not acquiescing to what somebody else
others demands, right?
Because and so I had to be respectful. It was his property, his house.
Right, but you're right. You can decline to do anything.
Yeah, and so
that at least the bird is still safe.
Right. Well, it was awful, but
yeah.
I mean, honestly, leading up to that for 2 days, I was hoping the bird would be okay. I'm going to get the bird. It's going to be fine. And then I'm the reason the bird got out. So it's an awful feeling. I can tell you that I need to put a screen in my dove aviary, but I never walk out with my back towards the birds. I back out. I have finches and a finchie in a 6x4. I have a screen.
Those guys they don't need much room.
Well, they're super, I mean, doves can be too. So I think one of those magnetic screens is a super good idea. I also think just making one out of screen material, what I did for my my finches was I just used a 2x4 at the top, wrapped the screen material, stapled it, bolted it onto the aviary, and then did a 2x4 at the bottom for weight. So it hangs nice and even with the door, doesn't flap around because of the 2x4 weight. It took me literally 10 minutes to put together. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
so
Yeah, good.
flyouts can happen. Elizabeth calls it threading the needle.
Yeah.
If there's a bird that wants to get out, I swear to God, they make a plan and they do it, and they can get out of tiny little, 2-inch gaps. I've seen it.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
I back out of my aviaries now.
Yeah, it's a good point. I always lock the aviary door behind me when I'm in it.
Yeah.
If I'm going in and out, the lock always goes on it. So the door can never blow open.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if I'm away for 1 second. Picking up a bucket. It's always, I do know that some folks have some really tiny cages. They don't have an aviary. They have these tiny outdoor cages. It's very difficult to maneuver in and out of them without leaving a huge gap. And I'm not sure that they lend themselves to the screen, but a screen or a towel can work in that situation. And
Yeah,
you're right, again, backing out, especially when the enclosure is so small, the backing out is big because you can keep your eye on the bird. But yeah.
Yeah, that's what my aviary is pretty small, but I have a towel that hangs so that I try to block the whole entrance whenever I'm transferring, but I have a towel that does the upper part. So like they can't get out past my head, you know what I
Right.
mean? Which is the
Yeah.
biggest gap.
Yeah.
But even doing all of that and knowing, it also depends on the bird. And it's kind of like what Jill said, if a bird wants to get out, the bird has made a plan.
Yeah.
So I'm super careful because I have 2 that are like, okay, I can go at any time, ma'am. And so I kind of have to tailor how I handle them that, with that in mind.
Right. Do we do anything like holding a towel in front of us when we go into a small enclosure, for example? Maybe that would also be a good idea. Like a high length towel in front of us when we're going in. What do you think of that idea?
I think the problem with that is that it uses up your hands, and your hands are going to be your greatest asset. If you've got a bird that wants to run, you got to have your hands.
And I think that would spook birds.
It would
too.
spook them more. Okay. So Shay has a question I want to move on to. And Jill, you made a good point about leave the door open in case the bird wants to come back. That's very important because you do want to have the bird come back. So you need to make the environment accessible to them, and and something where they want to come back. You could maybe call. I had one of my birds get out. She came back. She was a dove. She was not a pigeon, and she came back. So I called to her. She had been here long enough, so she knew where her food and everything was. So I think I got lucky. But you need to call them and make sure that their home is available to them. Shay wants to know about bringing a hose in and out of an aviary. And I want to say that I've always worried about this. And I created a system where you don't bring the hose in and out. You have a hookup inside that's connected to the outside. And we have that at Plowshares now too. Somebody else set up a different one at Plowshares. And so that's sort of thinking it, making the setup work for you and not having to worry about your setup. That's what I would recommend, is to try and get that set up, and I could help you with that. But what else can we say about if you have to bring a hose in and out of an aviary?
Well, I mean, depending on how many birds you have, and I know this sounds extreme, but if you have a reasonable number of birds, you can crate all of your birds. while you're cleaning the aviary.
Ooh,
I
good
mean,
point.
I've got a
Rate
big
your birds
crate.
first. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, kind of think about like who, and maybe you don't have birds that can climb out or whatever, but maybe you do have some that are a flight risk, and it's perfectly okay to crate them when you're doing your cleaning. I used to do that at Andy's because I had a couple that
Yeah.
little nervous guys, and I would just put them in a crate when I
And
was
some
cleaning the
people,
aviary.
yeah, and some people have the nest boxes that have a lock
They
on it.
can
So you have
close
a
them.
little thing and you just close them in. Perfect, right. So it's all about your setup and making your setup work for you, right? So, and if you have to just pull in some crates, then yeah, that's a good idea. Depending how often you use the hose. If it's every day, that's quite a lot, but hopefully it's only once a week. Hello.
Hi. Yeah, Ellie, I would love to see people, so anybody who has an actual setup inside so that there's a hose fixture that's just permanent. I would love to see how that works. I've got two, and I think for one of the, it's possible to crate or segregate some of the birds, but other birds, it's so hard to catch them. And those, and it's a whole trauma to get hold of them and crate them. And
those are the ones that are going to
those
run.
are the ones, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Those are the ones you're worried about, right? And so that just gets them all. Yeah. So that's kind of tough to do. Yeah, it's every day. It's a question for me. Am I going to get the hose twisted around? I mean, and it's been 10 years and I haven't, but you know.
Do you have wooden
6 months.
aviaries?
Would you say wood?
Do you have wood aviaries?
Yeah, both of them actually could be drilled.
Okay, then I will send you a video of what I have set up. It's worked well for me for several years.
I'd love to see it. Thank you.
Okay. So, is there anything else we want to talk more about safety, or shall we move on to maybe preventive medicine?
I think one of the things, and I'm just jumping in here, but I think one of the things Elizabeth was thinking about, and Elizabeth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of safety is we have a lot of people who don't even have a safe enclosure. And how do we get people to, you know, they'll like on the Facebook group, which I try not to go to too frequently, but people will show their, oh, I've got this set up, and it's just completely inappropriate for doves or pigeons. And then, you know, people will say, okay, well, these are the guidelines. And, you know, it's met with whatever kind of response. But, you know, how do we, and it's a problem when we come to adoptions too, because we get people that are like, oh, I have this aviary in the back and I want to, you know, I want some doves or I want some pigeons. And then they send a picture and it's just like, you know, oh my gosh, like this is so unsafe. You know, how do we stress that, like, that is kind of the foundation of being able to have a, you know, or care for any kind of bird, is to have like a safe place for them to exist where they're, you know, safe from predators, you know, where they can live a safe life.
Christina, how do you get these? You probably get the same type of responses where you are with Great Lakes.
Yeah, that would be a better question for Hava, actually, because she's the one that screens the adopters.
Okay.
But, and she wanted me to update you that she has an emergency, so she's not going to make it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. It's hard to coach people and change their minds about anything, I find. So, you know, if we can impress on them that these are real pets and they're not, okay, I'm going to say something, they're not like what somebody would consider backyard poultry that they just let run around, right? Although many people consider their chickens their pets. So I don't want to create a false narrative there or a false dichotomy there. But it's the sense of us trying to change the image that people have about pigeons as real pets. Like, you can bring them indoors just like a cat or dog. It's a real pet. It's not a throw. And trying to change that is really hard. And so when someone says they have an aviary, they're thinking it's good enough, right? If some get out, oh well, that's not a real pet in my view. And so trying to impress on them that they're adopting a pet that's going to keep them company, and it's going to be a creature that they care about and that they name and they want to keep as safe as possible, just like they would a cat or a dog. And that, you know, a strong aviary is going to be their best investment in taking care of their new pet. So, you know, but it's hard to do that over Facebook, or, you know, I think we might do better if we're able to do it in person, but over Facebook or email, like that's pretty hard. Yes, please.
Hi.
Hi.
This is what I do. This is actually what I do is I screen people, and I do home visits, safety checks.
Right.
I'm dealing with somebody right now that over the course of the past few weeks, I've been coaching him on how to make his aviary safe. He had plastic netting, you know. I sent him all the information, all the links, all the articles, people in general, not just him. And then I ask all the questions. Are the sides covered with hardware cloth? Is the ground? In his case, everything was perfect. I asked him if there was, what was underneath the rocks. Nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
So I said, listen, that I tell people the adoption fee is so small. Where you're spending your money is if they're outside birds, is making them safe, is their enclosure. And that's just the bottom line. We need these birds. We want them to, I tell everybody, we want them to go to forever homes. We don't want to have to take these birds back. I'm here all the time to coach and help, but their safety, we rescued almost all of these birds from unsafe situations. We don't want to put them in that kind of life again. They're not disposable.
Mm-hmm.
So home checks, lots of coaching. If somebody lives far away from me, lots of pictures, lots of, you know, put your hand against the hardware cloth. Let me see for size reference, how big it, you know, top, bottom, sides. If it's just wood on one side, cover it with hardware cloth. Just telling them that these guys are at the bottom of the food chain. Everything wants to eat them.
Mm-hmm.
We want to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I think that it's great, especially, you know, when people are trying to adopt birds from Palomacy, you know, we have like that level of ability to influence them or intervene. But when there are people that are like just, you know, posting on our group, which is huge now, and they're like, oh, I got these birds and I got them in my patio and isn't this great?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't really have any, in that situation, we don't have any, you know, anything other than our attempt to influence them. You know what I mean? And how do we get better at that, or you know, in a way that's helpful? Because ultimately, you know, their birds are going to get killed, or you know, some of them may get killed, but they can just go and get more birds. That's not really a problem.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of like, how do we influence them to look at birds differently from how they are really, like, you know, like this, oh, they're only $10 a bird, so
right,
whatever.
Well, yeah, it's like I would be asking, you know, why do you want a bird so much, right? And why do you want a bird from us? Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. But how do we go about that? I try to be genuinely non-judgmental, even though I might feel judgmental. I try to be genuinely open to, you know, just exploring what it is that they have and just asking questions and making suggestions that have some of the things that Jill was saying, you know, that you need to have it underneath, because a rat or something else can easily, or raccoon can easily dig under there and get in. And once a predator is in, it's all over. You know, sort of making it as easy as possible, or making sure that they can see the clear benefit to doing things the way we do them, and why. So I do see posts on Facebook that people criticize, and I would rather come at it from a different angle, which is to, be non-judgmental and try and point out where the weaknesses are, but being respectful about it. Because usually if somebody comes to the website, they're looking for help. So they're wanting to improve, or they're wanting to get an assessment of how their setup is. And they may have put they may have put a decent amount of effort into it already. We don't know. So I try not to shoot people down.
Yeah, I don't think anybody responds well to, that kind of criticism or piling on. You know what I mean? I think you just lose people with that. But it's really, I just feel like it's so hard to, when someone's like, I'm already here, I've already done this, to kind of like shift their thinking into like, wait a minute, your dove is like an incredible risk just to be out there. And
Right. People also bring their birds outside onto grass on a leash, and I always shudder when I see that. But again, I try not to judge, because I don't know where that person is. For example, or they know what the risks are and they've decided that they're still going to do this, in which case, I just don't, but there are places where there are no hawks, for example, which is very surprising to me. But if they're a place that I've never been, I can't really argue with them. So yeah. Elizabeth brings up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we start with the basics. And this is, I'm going to show you see if I can share my screen. Share my screen. Maslow's hierarchy of needs at Wikipedia. You start with physiological, which I'm not quite sure I understand. And then you go to safety. Then you go to belonging and love, and then esteem, cognition, aesthetic, self-actualization, and what? Transcendent pigeon is, I think, what we all aim for, transcendent pigeon. So I'm looking at what physiological needs mean. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but this is very interesting. So physiological is related to safety, shelter is a big one for us, right? Heat and air, hygiene, that's all physiological. And so you guys can take a look at the Wikipedia article about Maslow. It's also in the chat, that we need to be, she says, we are often consulted about low risk issues when big basic safety issues are much more fundamental. So we always need to be looking at the big picture, the whole picture, when we're being consulted. If we know, if we have that level of access. Shall we move on to other issues? Prevention of diseases. The two that I know about that I treat for are canker and worms. And those are my two basics. And I know canker is called different things to different people. Some people call it thrush, although I'm not sure if it's always the same thing in birds. But I know that some people call it thrush. And I think some people use the medical term as well, which was
Trichomonas.
trichomonas, because it is a nematode. I hate those things. And it can be insidious because it can be invisible. So the preventive care for that is very important. as are the worms, although we, as a group, we assume that all of our birds have a small load of worms, although if your birds are inside and you've been treating them for worms, I would expect that they would lose their worm population permanently at some point. I could be wrong. I'd like to hear other people's opinions on that. Christina, do you have an opinion about worms?
Yes, I do. It depends on multiple things. Like you were saying, people who take their birds outside and play in the grass, you're more likely to pick up worm
You're
eggs
gonna
and
get a worm there.
coccidia.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure, right,
things like that.
right.
Sometimes when volunteers are cleaning the rehab room, you know, a bird can jump over them and escape, and then you have a loose bird in the room. Well, if that bird happens to poop and no one ever sees it, and that bird has worms, well, you know, another bird that potentially lands in that area could pick up worms, even though they were previously cleared for worms.
Mhm.
Or if you have, sometimes we have to have multiple birds in a cage if we're running low on space. And obviously that's an easy way to transmit worms. They'll poop in their food. The next bird eats the food, you know, things like that. But yeah, anytime someone says that they take their bird outside, I'm always reminding them, well, I would definitely, you know, it depends. Some people don't like to preventatively treat. So I always say, well, take them to the vet and get a fecal then. Like, you know, chances are you picked up some worms or coccidia. So,
Mhm.
and then, oh my God, what? I never knew that.
Right. And so I treat for both of those twice a year. Let's talk about some other ones that we could. So there's also bacterial infections. You mentioned coccidia. I guess I don't know if salmonella is a thing or any other bacterial infections.
Yes, we don't preventatively treat for bacterial infections, though we do canker, coccidia, and deworming.
Is coccidia not is it bacterium or is it a fungus?
You know, coccidia is a protozoa.
It is
just like,
also a protozoan. Okay.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
that's one that's ubiquitous in nature. If you even, you know, dogs and cats get it. If you let them run around in the grass, they might pick it up in their paw pads, bring it inside, and then,
Oh,
you know, things like that.
How does coccidia present if a pigeon was ill from it, or do they not get ill from it?
It depends on the load. I do my own fecals because not only is it a hobby, but I also graduated with a degree in medical lab tech. So I love doing this stuff. I love looking at their poops.
Mhm.
So, but I've noticed some birds can just carry it, have a low load, like, you know, 5 eggs on the whole slide. Other birds will have tons, and that's usually when you would see signs. They're pretty nondescript. You can't really look at a bird and say, oh, that's definitely a coccidia, you know, bird. You would have to rule everything out. Like in my case, I'm lucky that I can just take a poop sample and check. Hava says she can sometimes tell based on how the poop looks. I haven't really noticed a trend, but she would say, you know, a big watery poop, sometimes bubbles in the poop, things like that. But yeah, you wouldn't really know unless you ran
You
tests.
need to do a fecal, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And do you know where this protozoa prefers to be in the body?
Yes, it's in the intestines.
In the
So
intestines, okay.
yeah, it'll pass through their poop.
So it wouldn't be a respiratory distress, for
No.
example.
No.
And I'm wondering if birds do have any respiratory illnesses that people should be cognizant of.
Oh my God, this year was terrible for fungal pneumonia. We had
Oh.
3 really bad cases, and
Is
we
that
only,
from aspergillosis?
yes, I was just gonna say, we only realized it, you know, like I said earlier, we're not spending money on tests for every single bird. So the only way we found this out after the fact was through necropsy. You can actually fungal colonies in the air sacs throughout the whole bird.
Ugh.
So it's really, really upsetting.
And does that have to do, how does that arise? I mean, is it cleanliness, or is it, I mean, here we're always looking for black mold and making sure, oh, no black mold, no black mold in the aviaries, you know. Is it more complicated than that?
Yes. Yeah. Birds will naturally carry it, believe it or not. It's part of their normal flora, but
Okay.
obviously if it takes over, then you got a problem.
Okay. So
And
they're already, yeah. So there's other things going on in the bird actually that allow the aspergillus, that allow the fungus to grow, basically.
Exactly. And the 3 birds that I mentioned, you know, we don't know their medical history. They
Mhm.
were rescued racers. One had a broken leg. So I was really busy focusing on the broken leg. And then I realized she started having respiratory symptoms.
Right.
You know, so it could be that her immune system was so low. She was you know, lost racer. You know, who knows what her history was.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, there's
things-
so many things that factor into a bird's health. It's yeah. I just want to ask one more question, is what is the treatment for that?
Nebulization. Some people will say nystatin, but nystatin is more for crop, you know, like candida, or if it's in the GI tract, if they're passing stool with yeast, budding yeast in it, that's when you would use nystatin. But for a fungal pneumonia, you need to nebulize it. So the medicines we use are amphotericin B. There actually is a pill called voriconazole, but that's specific for, you know, in the respiratory system.
Okay. Nicole, you have a question. You can always butt in with your voice. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how long you had your hand up.
Oh, it's good discussion, so I don't mind waiting. To circle back though to fecals, I've been wanting to learn to do them on my own for the longest time, but you know, I don't trust the internet. Are there any good resources for learning how to do proper fecal egg counts at home?
Yes, I can send you photos. There's a book I highly recommend, but the problem is it's really expensive. It was written by a veterinarian in Australia, but it's, you know, whenever you look for bird health on the internet, you're going to find parrot related things. So I invested in this book. It's amazing. It has everything to do with pigeon health. And there's a chapter specific to microscopy.
What's the title of the book?
The title of the book is, there's 2 different versions. The first edition, which is cheaper, it's called The Flying Vet's Pigeon Health and Management. And then the second edition, I'm check right now. I think it's just called The Pigeon Vet, but one second, let me look.
I mean, maybe Palomacy invests in that to make it available to people. That'd be really cool.
Oh yeah,
my sister likes to do under the slide microscope stuff too.
It's called The Pigeon. And then there's like a subtitle. It says it's veterinary care management and cultural history. If you Google the author though, it should pop up. His name is Dr. Colin Walker, Colin Walker.
He's the dude in Australia, right?
Sounds like
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I'll look that
And
up.
if you reach out to me, I can also, you know, send you photos.
Thanks.
There it is, The Flying Vet's Pigeon Health Management.
I'm sorry, what's the second edition called? Just the
The second
pigeon?
edition, yeah, it's just called The Pigeon, but it has that you know, that subheading.
Mm-hmm.
I see it. It's on Seagull. It's in seagullpigeons.com.
Ah.
I believe Foy's or Jed's had it at one point too.
Mhm.
It's on Amazon too.
Yeah,
Just looking
I think
for
that's
it.
where I got it from.
I'm looking for the second version though. I've only seen the first one.
Right.
Well, we can look into getting that.
It's I definitely recommend it. If you have the money for it, I think it was $200, but it's definitely worth having.
Well, then we can share it with with people.
Right.
Okay. Christina, you were mentioned. Oh, go ahead, Nicole. Go ahead.
Oh, while we were at it, I had one other question, which is, I was very lucky that like Medical Center for Birds was able to teach me how to gavage feed. But for example, I'd love to learn how to do sub-Q injections and crop flushing, but I'm not going to bother the staff at MCFB because they're busy. Are there routes that folks have taken to properly learn how to do these things? Because I don't want to DIY learning how to do things.
I learned from Blanca, who was our actual medical director for the group. And I believe she learned from the vet, one of our vets. But I would definitely I don't know, it's maybe worth asking like a wildlife rehabber near you and just say, hey,
Yes.
can you tell me how to do this?
Yes.
But I would definitely recommend seeing it.
I didn't learn sub Q, but I feel like I know enough to be able to do sub Q if someone were to just tell me how to do it. Like, this is the location on the bird, this is the structure that you're looking for, because I've done sub Q in other animals and I've done gavage in birds. But I did it through volunteer work, International Bird Rescue and Sassoon Wildlife Center. So I think you get it by going to a rehabber. Sassoon might, if you go to Sassoon and say, I'd like to volunteer a little bit, I'm really interested in learning more advanced skills, I'm sure they would take you, but I think you would have to be a volunteer. Then you might be able to reach out to them and say, might you do some teaching? I mean, I could reach out to them and ask that maybe if we have a group session, I could ask them, or we certainly have experts here in-house, right, on the West Coast that could show us how to gavage and sub-Q. Jill, you're frozen. I don't know. Jill, you could try one thing, which is turning off your video and just putting on your audio.
Oh, sorry, my connection again.
Yeah, you kind of, I think you wanted to say something. I was just going to say that you could try turning off your video, but just keeping your audio. You might get a more stable connection that way.
I'm going to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if you heard what I was saying, but I could ask somebody at Sassoon if they would want to give a teaching class to us, but we have a lot of people here. We have you who know how to do gavage and things like that already.
Right. And I learned from people like Hava and
Okay.
Elizabeth, and Elizabeth taught me how to do sub Q. And then Hava told me a better way to do it. I mean, a different way. But we just learn, I think, from each other.
Right. I'm wondering whether we can do that, make a formal one, one or twice a year to formalize that for some folks.
Right. Just meeting up at a certain point and doing hands-on, since then I've taught couple people how to do sub Q and tube feeding. So
let's actually talk about that a little bit, sub Q and tube feedings, and also giving medication. So those are three different things, right? Obviously the sub Q is very different, but the things going down the throat, there's giving medication and there's gavage. Not quite sure if there's anything else going down the throat unless you're taking a sample, for example, if you're trying to take a swab, but I don't think we generally don't do that. We leave that up to vets. So Jill, do you want to describe how you give medicine to a bird down the throat? Like how far, here's my Pidgey, right? If I were giving her a medicine, I'd be opening her beak, I'd be avoiding the trachea, which is the hole smack dab in the middle of the mouth, which is weird.
Tongue. Yeah.
And you have to go to the side, and you can go down really far. If I've got a syringe that's this big, I can go down that. I can go down there.
I usually go down, I want to go past the trachea.
You want to go past, but you can go quite a bit further. So if you're at all unsure, just go down further.
Yeah, I've showed people how to do it, and I show them, I kind of wiggle the syringe around to show them, and a lot of people are shocked that you can go, but I just tell them
only have to go enough past the trachea so that when you put the medicine in, it doesn't bubble back up.
Yeah, and you should hold the bird for a second,
right,
just to make sure everything's
that they don't cork it up. Or
I mean, I just picked up a bird at Medical Center for Birds the other day, and I said to the I sent it to the doctor, Vanessa. I go, why is he gurgling now? He wasn't doing that before. And she says, well, when you picked him up, I think he aspirated a little bit. And I'm like, what? What the heck? You know, it's like, but she purposely didn't have him gavage fed because of the ride, because I was picking him up for the ride home. And
You thought he might throw up and just put some
yeah,
down
so
his
Michael, what did
trachea.
he gurgle up? And she said, I don't know, maybe his meds from this morning. So I don't know. If you have a fractious pigeon, just make sure they're toweled really well and or just held,
Right. Yeah,
closely
you need
and
control over your
tightly, not
pigeon.
too
Right. Right. Oh, here's Rose. Oh, she's here. Jill's cutting out. Yeah, so I am not very good. I know some people who do this with one hand, but I can't do it with one hand. I have to
Oh.
sort of burrito my bird and open her beak with both hands. It works, right? As long as you can get it
Everybody
in
has
there.
Elizabeth has one method where she grabs the bottom beak so they open their top beak, and that just doesn't work for me. So I usually just I just have my own way. It's whatever
right.
you're comfortable with, and
As long as you have control of the bird.
mhm. I usually lift the head up a little bit.
So she's not doing it for me, right? If I'm,
She's opening her mouth.
yeah, but it's not enough, right? So, okay, there you go. Okay, that
Yeah,
could
and then
possibly work for me.
And you want to
So-
go into the esophagus is on their right.
Well,
Their
it's on either side.
no.
Yes.
Yes?
It is on either
Mhm.
side. The trachea is
Yeah.
right in the middle. It's the weirdest thing.
I always went to the right. I was always taught to go to.
That's
Hmm.
easier, yeah, but it technically it is on both
I
sides.
did not know. I've been doing this for like 11 years. I didn't know you could go on either
What?
side.
So what makes it easier to go on the right?
Well, I'm assuming that's based on the fact everyone is, or I should not say everyone, but a lot of people are right-handed.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's the person who's dispensing. It's not an
I'm ass-
anatomical feature. Okay.
I'm assuming that, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm left-handed, so I do it the other way, but
Yeah, I'm left-handed too.
as long as it gets in, basically,
fine. I'm fine.
Interesting. I'm learning. I learned something today, but I'll still go
So-
to the right because I know that.
Because no, it's fine. So with gavage though, you're taking a long tube, you're filling it up so that it's dribbling out the bottom. You're making, this is how I learned it. You are creating a fluid on the surface of it as well, so that it slides in nicely. It doesn't get stuck on their throat because you're going down quite a ways.
Yeah, some people put mineral oil or whatever on it.
Yeah, we would do it at International Bird. It would be a little bit of the food, not so much that they could aspirate it, but just so that it had a little bit of liquid on the surface so that it could slide down. And it goes down. So on Charlie here, it would go down to about here. Like right here. Oh, she doesn't like me touching her. That's the thing.
Yeah. I think Christina should talk about this. Now I feel like
Sure.
I know nothing.
No, come
Oh,
on.
no. I was just gonna add, if you were to, I know a lot of people might not be comfortable, but if you were to look at a dissected pigeon, it would give you a better visual of how the crop is, the esophagus is on inside the mouth. And what was the question about gavage? I'm sorry, I missed it.
So trying to visualize how far down you want to go, for example, in
right.
the bird of Charlie's size, which is a
Yes.
medium-sized pigeon, sort of down mid-chest.
Right.
'Cause
Mhm.
and also the crop is a little bit to the rear, right? It's a little bit more this way.
I'm used to it being more
It's more
kinda
right
like
here.
like their
Right.
chest,
It's
like
right
their,
here. Okay.
yeah.
And do we
Mhm.
go past their crop? I guess that's the thing I wanted to ask. Do we go into the crop or past the crop for gavage?
Technically you can go into the stomach.
Hmm.
One of our vets at Niles would do that if necessary, but I would definitely not recommend a lay person or probably
Okay.
one of them, and to not do that, just go into the crop.
Okay, yeah, so the crop is here in the front.
Right.
Hello, I know you hate it, I'm sorry.
And I was told, while you're learning, if you take the tube, whatever kind of tube, I prefer the rubber tubes. I know some people like the metal ones, but if you hold,
Rubber ones are
the
great.
tubes, yeah, if you hold the tube from their beak and just, against their chest on the outside,
Mhm.
that would give you an idea of like how far to put it in, and you can mark it with like a,
Right.
some sort of mark. So
Right.
that way, when you're going in, if you see that mark in, in his beak, you're pretty much in the right
Right.
area.
And usually gavage is for feeding wet food, right? That you have to mix up beforehand to
Right.
the proper consistency, temperature. And you've got to put it in a big plunger and attach the gavage tube to it. There's a kind of a whole process you go through for making sure there's no air bubbles in it.
Right.
It's not as hard as I'm making it sound. It's just it's just a procedure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just kind of stepwise thing. But yeah, you get the baby bird food basically, and you put a little warm water in there, the right consistency. And it depends on how much nutrition they need, right? And how much hydration they need. So if they don't need much nutrition, they need more hydration, then obviously it's a milkier, I mean, it's a more watery solution. But that, a vet would be the one who'd be guiding you on what exactly you're gavaging down the bird. Or somebody else who's an expert on what the bird needs. You gonna poop for me? Well, you're doing something. I don't know what you're doing. What you doing? You okay?
Looks like she's flattening for you.
I know, I don't know why. I've just been being irritating to her, so I don't know why she's doing that.
Like pancake mode, I think, if you get what I'm saying.
I do. It's not like her. Hi. So I wanted to go back to something you said, Christina. Yeast
Yeah.
in the poo, and
Mhm.
whether we need to be. So I think people often ask questions about, does my bird have a yeast overgrowth? And I've never really understood what we need to be looking for with yeast, why it's a problem. I mean, I know it's a problem because it's a fungus, but I don't really quite know where it presents itself, what it looks like, what are the ramifications for the bird with a yeast overgrowth.
So if we're talking about yeast in the poop, because there's also that yeast that can be in the crop, that's sauerkraut, but yeast in
Okay.
poop it's usually caused by antibiotics. Same with humans. If you take antibiotics, then the yeast is going to get out of control. Women,
So
know
you've
this
ruined the
more.
biome. Mhm.
Right? Yeah. Ladies wouldn't understand. You might get yeast infection.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
similar.
Mhm.
And the bird, you wouldn't see yeast in the poop. Obviously, that's something you'd see under a microscope. But a way that I've had luck telling is sometimes the poop will smell like fermenting hops, basically.
Right.
So whenever someone asks me a poop question, I always ask, okay, well, does it smell like,
Smell like beer.
right?
Yeah.
And if they say yes, it does smell, I usually follow up with, well, is the bird nesting? Because that's also something you got to take into consideration. Nesty poops are going to stink because they're holding it in so long. But yeah, yeast in the poop, it's usually caused by giving the bird antibiotics, like long course antibiotics.
Yeah. And the yeast in the crop, sour crop, I've read various remedies for that. Would be vinegar in the water, gavage of the, or not gavage, but soft massage of the crop.
Yeah, I personally, in my own experience anyway, it's usually a bird whose GI system is not really motile, so everything is just getting stuck in the crop and just fermenting in there. And the same with the poop. If you open up the bird's beak and give it a sniff, that might tell you what's going on, because their breath will smell really bad.
Right.
So,
and these things need to go to a vet, obviously.
Right,
For care.
yeah,
It's not something you necessarily treat at home.
no, and members of the public aren't usually going to have the medicines on hand anyways, but
Right.
us who do rehabbing might, and I would say again, like nystatin is the go-to, because that's, think of it like a topical. When you give the bird the medicine, it's just gonna sit on the top layer of the crop and the inside. I mean, it'll sit there and that'll kill the yeast.
Hmm.
Instead of getting absorbed into the blood, it just sits in there.
So Elizabeth brings up an important point that I didn't make, was when you're tube feeding or doing sub-Q fluids, it's usually a situation under a vet's care, and an expert is the one who's going to be doing these things. So sub-Q fluids, I don't know if we want to go too much into that, because as Elizabeth said, it's something that an expert would do. I haven't done sub-Q in a bird before. I don't know if anyone can demonstrate sort of where it goes. There's probably a couple of different places. I certainly wouldn't do it without knowing anything about it. And I don't know anything about it specifically, right? So I don't really know where, or taking blood for that matter.
Right. It's definitely high risk.
The
Because
bird is so tightly packed.
Sorry.
With cats and dogs, they have, and well, not so much, well, lesser extent people, they have a gap between their skin and their muscle
Right.
tissue and all their structures.
Right.
And birds don't have that, and they have air
They don't.
sacs.
Yes.
So
That's
a
what
bigger
I was going to say. The main area you would do it is the inguinal fold. That's what it's called, but it's basically that little skin in between the leg and
Right.
the trunk of the body.
Okay.
But you have to be careful, because like you said, there's air sacs all throughout their body, and if you don't know what you're doing, you can accidentally drown the bird by putting the
Right.
fluids into an air sac. So
Into an air sac, yeah. And when do we give sub-Q fluids?
that's a really good question, and I always struggle with that also. Hava would be one to better explain, but
Okay.
whenever I get a bird that's just in miserable condition, and if he's cold, like not retaining body temperature, and if he just looks, if he feels skinny too, chances are he's not eating, which means his body is, becoming dehydrated. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So a bird in pretty bad shape, if they're not regulating their temperature anymore, and they're
Right.
not really taking care of themselves with their
Right.
calorie intake.
Right,
Yeah.
so if you get a starving, extremely emaciated bird,
Mhm.
the first thing the two things I would want to do is warm them up and hydrate before
Yes.
you even start to think about feeding, because their GI system isn't going to work.
So I want to ask you about that, hydrate. So when we, as just members of the public out there who want to rescue a bird, our instinct is to give it some water and give it some food, maybe force feed it
Oh God.
frozen peas, or not frozen peas, but warmed up peas to give it some hydration. And formal rehabbers, for example, at Wild Care or Lindsay Museum, they don't give anything at all. So where do you, at what point do you make the decision to give hydration before a bird has maybe seen the vet? Or sometimes do these birds not go to the vet, or?
Is that for me?
Sure, Christina and Jill.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Jill.
Well, I mean, it depends on who has the bird. If it's a layperson.
Well, I'm talking about you. I mean, like if you say that the first thing you want to do is warm them and hydrate them. What comfort level do you have to hydrate them before a vet sees them?
Can I jump in on this one?
Oh, hello. Yes, and ask your question too.
Hello. Two things. So wildlife rescues and rehabs say do not give any food or water to any wild animal that you rescue. Just get them to us. Just as a simple way to try and preclude all the, I gave him cat food, I poured
Right.
water down his throat, all the crazy things that potentially can be done.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I think it's smart because the imagination is vast and people will do
Yeah.
all kinds of crazy things. We have learned, I think over the years, pigeons often come in and doves dehydrated. And sometimes they're too weak to even drink when there's water available. But we do that little, you don't have to start anything invasive. We do that, hold the water up, just a little cup, a little shot glass, whatever, right up to the beak, wet the beak.
Okay.
A lot of times they won't do anything. They just wait. You take it away and you do it again. And usually 2 or 3 attempts of that will rouse and inspire them enough that they'll start drinking. And that is, to me, a good and safe thing that anybody can and should be advised on how to do. Not pouring it in, not
sub-Q. We're not talking about doing sub-Q. We're talking about offering.
No.
Yeah.
And that was actually why I raised my hand. I just wanted to say, I think this is, I think the idea of getting together and having a training on, more invasive or advanced procedures or whatever is a wonderful one. But I think it's an in-person, hands-on experience. I don't think that we can really do justice to in this kind of a format.
Right. No, I yeah, for sure. Nicole?
Yes. So I, as someone who's relatively new to pigeons, I've been surprised how, since I learned at Medical Center for Birds how to gavage feed, it's been very useful. Sub-Q, I'm not sure how useful that is if it's something that ever I really am going to have to do. So kind of my question is, what are the sort of skills that we would say would be worth learning, if that's a worthwhile question?
Yeah, especially responding to birds that are down, birds that have illnesses for whatever reasons. Do we have I want to add on to that question, is there a way to develop a protocol for assessing a bird when they come to you?
That would be a great question for Hava.
Okay, I have 2 for her. Yeah, I mean, I think there are wildlife rehabbers certainly do use a protocol. But I don't think we have one written down or anything. I think it would be great for you to work one-on-one again with somebody in the group to learn those things, just to kind of discover what the protocol is. But as Jill started to say, first thing is warm and hydrated. Jill, what do we do once they are stable? Or is that the steps that we take to get them to be stable?
Yeah, those are, well, I would gavage feed and, it just depends on, the steps I take are getting them warm, getting them hydrated, waiting a little bit. Once they're hydrated and they're warm, then I would gavage feed. Depending on how skinny they are, I would even maybe water the food down because I don't want it too rich. You can get feeding syndrome depending. And then you wait for poop. You wait to see if they're
see the sign.
properties and see if their GI is working. It's a touch and go thing sometimes. I also try to hold and reassure because so much of their health is
Emotional. I think she meant to say something like that. Christina, do you use protocols?
I do. It's not really like universal throughout the group. Everyone does their own thing on intake, but I try to get a possible like backstory on the bird, like some people will say, oh my God, I saw this bird get attacked by a cat and what, yada, yada. So that way I know I'm prepared to look
You
for
have to do
puncture wounds.
something, right, right.
Right.
Yeah.
Or versus, well, there was this one time, I always bring this up as a good example. Someone had a pigeon by their bird feeder for, however many days, finally brought it. I'm asking him, how's the bird look? Like, does he look healthy? Is he broken wing? Whatever. Oh no, the bird looks totally fine, totally normal. Well, he brings me the bird and the first thing I notice is the tail is missing. So I know, and that's fine. Members of the public, they might not know what to look for anyways, but I started looking them over, just a thorough, like physical, like lift up the wings, see if there's any injuries under the wings or by the base of the tail, since that's what was missing. I did end up finding puncture wounds on his side. But, basically things like that. And if it's a neuro pigeon that involves much more in-depth exam, I actually did a YouTube video on it, but it's basically seeing if they can balance, testing what nerves are working and which ones aren't. If you remember from anatomy and back in high school or college, like they tell you which cranial nerves control what part of the body. Basically that's what I do for a neuro pigeon. But so yeah, it's different for each bird, and I'm sure other members of GLPR have other ways of doing it too.
I think it would be really interesting to learn what your test is for a neurological bird and testing those nerves. I'm not sure that we do that.
Yeah, it's not necessarily like, I wouldn't say it's something you should do on every bird. It's just something that I
No.
personally do.
Yeah. So obviously when you get a bird in, you need to do an exam first, right? To see what its major problems, or see what its problems, why is it with you? And up to now, we've been talking about a down bird, an emaciated bird, not necessarily a bird that sustained an injury. So we can get into talking about birds with injuries. Lisa, did you have a question?
Oh, I just wanted to say, first of all, that's such great information, Christina. But also Jill had talked about, you want to warm your bird, you want to hydrate your bird, but if the bird has some kind of head injury, you want to be really careful when you're warming your bird. Because you don't want to make it worse or increase any kind of inflammation that would cause permanent brain injury.
I see. Okay, so that's so how do you assess a bird with head injury?
Who, me?
Anybody. I mean, obviously, if their head is dented, like my bird is, that's pretty obvious. And then, but I guess you can do a sight test, right? To see if they can see.
That's one of the, exactly.
Their pupil reaction.
Yep.
A lot of times you would rely on, did the bird hit a window and it was brought in by somebody, or I mean, that's kind of
it came in. Okay.
Because if they're just coming in neurological, like you don't know, is it viral? Is it injury? Is it?
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in terms of temperature, what is the, like, what do you, so if you do have a bird with a head injury, do you put them on heat? Do you put them on low heat? What is the guidelines for or what guides you in determining how much heat to give the bird?
I try to bring them back to their normal body temperature. And we've had vets, believe it or not everyone agrees, but we've had vets say different things. One vet would say, don't give Metacam because it has blood thinning properties. And one of our other vets says, the benefits outweigh the risks, give them Metacam, because it's an anti-inflammatory. So, but I personally, I would put them on low heat, basically, like you said. I just try to get them to their normal body temperature, because usually when it's a collision, they can lose that ability to thermoregulate. So.
And how do you take a pigeon's temperature?
I've never had to, and none of my vets, that's not part of their exam. So that's a good question. I would assume maybe through the cloaca, but I don't know. I've never had to do that before.
And I don't even know what the normal temperature of a bird was, 102 or something like that maybe, but I'd have to look
Yeah,
it
I
up.
think it's 98 to 102 or something. I forget.
106 for pigeons.
106. Elizabeth, do you know how to take their temperature?
I've never seen anybody do it, but I think you can tell, they have the bald brood patch on the breast.
Mm,
And that is pretty much always warm. Like that's their 106. And that they really, so if
I'm going
that
to do that
bird,
today. I'm gonna check her brood patch. I'm gonna see what
yeah,
it comes out
if
as.
it felt cool and I had other reason to suspect that this bird might have been,
Okay.
Truthfully, cold is one of the least worries, I think, for pigeons. I mean, you don't want to try and force feed a cold pigeon,
No.
but cold is rarely an issue unless it's a nestling,
Right. Right.
that's very different.
Right. Or unless its feather coat has been disrupted somehow with like it's got covered in grease or something, right? It's not going to be able to retain its heat if you can't get it clean.
Yeah, I
But I
still
mean,
think
you see that in water birds. You don't necessarily see that in pigeons, although I have seen some pigeons come in with grease from like a restaurant grease trap or something like that.
I think
know.
their temperature tolerances are so wide that
Yeah.
if it's in your house and
Mhm.
it's 65 degrees in your home,
Mhm.
that an adult pigeon, even if they're bald, is probably going to be fine. Like to cope with that would be my guess.
Mhm. Okay. So let's see. I mean, there's a lot to delve into in terms of injured pigeons, right? How to wrap a wing, um, how to splint a break, or how to treat splay leg, which we don't have time for. I want to talk a little bit about a couple of medications. Um, um, no, now I can't remember it.
Enro?
Silvasulfidine.
Oh, okay.
Silvasulfidine, which to me is like a little miracle ointment. I had a pigeon who had been scalped and took them to medical center for birds, and the treatment was this cream, this ointment, and that was it. And all the skin grew back, and the pigeon was happy as a clam. I can't remember if they had Medicam or not. I mean, I'm sure it was just a long time ago, and I'm sure the treatment was appropriate. But I just remember that was really a miracle. And I don't know if anybody else has other opinions about that cream and when to use it, when not to use it. I'm sure there's times when you shouldn't use it when you've got a wound. But it's worked well for me. Anybody?
It's interesting you mentioned scalped pigeon because well, one of our vets, when we had a scalped pigeon, still SSD cream, that's what we call it for short, but he likes SSD cream, but he's a huge fan of Tegaderm, which it's not an antibiotic like SSD, but it serves the same purpose, which is keeping the wound moist, but also blocking, everything else, keeping everything else away. So, but and everyone's different. I don't think we've used SSD cream for, I'd have to actually think about when the last time we used it was, but ever since we learned and bought Tegaderm, we basically use that for any injury. Yeah.
Any injury. Okay. External injury. Yeah.
Any open wound, I should say.
Right. That doesn't need surgery.
Right.
Yeah.
Christina, are you talking about Tegaderm, like the thin plastic?
Yes.
And how does that do on their feet? Is that something I can use on their feet? Like if I'm treating trying to seal off a bumblefoot or like a pressure ulcer or something?
Oh, I remember International Bird Rescue did that on a bird with bumblefoot on both feet, and they were using Tegaderm several days, and then they would wrap it all up, and every day they would change the Tegaderm. Yeah.
I personally never used Tegaderm for bumblefoot. I currently have one of my personal birds has bumblefoot, He's a one-legged pigeon and he's got it really bad right now. So
Mm.
what I'm using for him is, it's an antibiotic topical ointment called mupirocin. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but I use that on a piece of gauze. I remember you mentioned earlier you're not doing the gauze, but I put that ointment on a piece of gauze, put it on the sole of his foot where the bumble is. And then just recently I started doing, I forget what they call it, but it's essentially like a horseshoe, except it's a full circle. So there's a hole in the middle to take pressure off of the bumble. So that's what I've been doing for my bird.
Wow.
It's
Do
like
you,
treating corn on a human's foot. What is
Right.
is the medicine by prescription?
Yes.
Okay.
are you changing that daily, Christina? Is that a Q day?
Yes. And if you have the time, it would probably benefit the bird to do it more than that. But I try to keep his environment as clean as possible, which is really difficult. You know, they're pooping all over the place. It's him and his mate. So,
Right.
but yeah, I try to change the bandage at least once a day because, you know, the more junk they step in, the more moisture gets in there, and then you're just feeding the growth of bacteria and stuff.
Thank you.
And there was another one I wanted to talk about. Well, any other medications other folks want to talk about, but I was going to mention fenbendazole or Panacur, right?
Mhm.
Which is a no-go for pigeons.
Right.
It boxes their liver or something. They don't process it, right? So it's toxic.
It affects their bone marrow and
Bone
their
marrow.
white cell count.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty nasty.
That's nasty stuff. Okay.
And it's interesting. Sorry to just add something really quick. Yeah, one of our vets didn't even know about that.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
like I'm sure there's a lot of vets, but this in particular was interesting. He's like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. Can you send me the studies?" And because I'd mentioned, "Oh yeah, there's paperwork on it." Oh, so I sent him. I think there was like 3 different studies. I sent him those, and he was like, "Wow, okay, I learned something." You know, a vet that's receptive to information. How about
Right.
that?
Right. Right. So as pigeon keepers, we all have to be cognizant of that one
Right.
thing when we go to the vet, because not all vets are gonna necessarily know that.
Yes,
detail.
exactly.
Can I say one thing? I know you want to talk about meds, but in terms
Oh, go
of
ahead.
vets, one of the things that I see a lot are people that are saying that their vets are recommending a pellet diet for pigeons and doves versus
Oh,
a
yeah.
seed diet.
I don't get
And
it.
how do we, I mean, it
The-
seems
the-
pretty
the-
problematic.
So I would say that the pigeon seed that I get is formulated specifically for pigeons, and it's a seed and grain diet that has added vitamins
Right.
from a reputable manufacturer. So I don't understand why the Harrison's pellet would be, I'm guessing Harrison's would be preferred. The only thing I can guess is that if you can get your bird to tolerate the pellet, that means they're getting the complete nutrition profile. Whereas if
Exactly.
you give them the bowl of seeds and grains, they can pick and choose. And so if you are not strict in your diet for your pigeons and you give them more than what they're required per day, they can possibly get a nutrition profile that's off balance and they're
Right.
eating. So I think that's the reason. But my pigeons pick and choose and they're fine. And I add extra vitamins into their diet. I add petamine, which is and they love it. They love petamine. The doves and the pigeons, they love the petamine. They'll just eat it. And it's got vitamins in there too. So I know they're getting their vitamins and their calcium. I think that's why. I think that's why they recommend the pellet.
My opinion is, I think again, it just boils back to vets. Most vets being citizen vets, they're used to parrots, and they're always telling parrot, you know, what kind of diet is the bird on? Make sure they're on a pelleted diet, basically for the reason you said, that it's a complete.
Each pellet is a complete nutrition. Each pellet.
Yes, exactly. So vets are more likely to just say, yeah, let's switch them to a pelleted diet instead of a seed diet, because either they don't know enough about pigeon diet, or maybe they do and they just prefer pellets because, like, again, you said pigeons can pick and choose what they're eating. So
Yeah, so I think unless you are feeding them your own custom mix that you haven't thought out properly, I don't think you need to feed them pellets. I think you can feed them whatever these commercial, a good quality commercial mix is, like Volkmann we have on the West Coast. I've been buying a Belgian brand that's coming through Chewy that's half the cost, which is weird. But I only give that to the wild pigeons. But that'll have vitamins in it as well. So, and then I supplement as well.
right.
occasionally. So yeah, I've heard that too. And some birds like it, which is fine. If they like it, great, but, and I guess it could be probably cheaper than buying the seeds, because the seeds right now, at least for me, are very expensive. So pellets probably cheaper right now, but I doubt that my birds would eat it.
Right. We tried buying the the pellet that's, I forget what brand it is, but it's basically racing birds, pelleted diet. We tried buying a bag of that to see if any of the racers we get would recognize it and maybe eat that. But, there's maybe like a handful at most that really liked it, but we've learned that majority of the pigeons just eat the seed.
So what medicines are good to have, or what are the most significant medicines people should know about in pigeon care? We've not talked about the medicines that I mentioned for worms and trichomonas, but that's I can't think of my words. I'm sorry. If someone else can pick up the thread. Important
I
medicines.
use moxidectin.
Right.
What-
Moxidectin for the worms.
Or moxie, there's another one, moxie something.
Praziquantel.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we use. We use the moxidectin praziquantel. Quest Plus is the name.
Yes. Yeah.
We've been told, I just recently was told by the doctors at Medical Center for Birds that we should be switching off really between ivermectin, moxidectin, and pyrantel.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
the worms can become resistant.
I've heard that, and some of the vets say it doesn't matter at some vets, because I guess a lot of those studies were done for horses and there isn't really a definitive conclusion anyways. But yeah, I've heard that too. Some people I know, like breeders, will do that. They'll swap dewormers every 6 months or whatever. But yeah, I guess it just depends on what you're able to keep in stock.
What was that? Ivermectin, moxidectin, and what, Jill?
Pyrantel.
Oh, pyrantel. And what do we do for the canker? Ronavet? I do a pill. It's usually a pill, right?
I use Spartrix from Harper's.
Oh, right, Spartrix, right.
Mhm.
Okay.
We used to do metronidazole oral,
Mhm.
and then we swapped to Spartrix or Pantrix, either one of those. We tried to reserve ranitazole for like highly resistant strains.
And then there are things that we should have on hand in the house. I have liquid calcium supplement
Yes.
that works well. Don't need it very often, but it's very helpful to have on hand, because when you need it, you need it. Anything else should have on hand, or medicines to be aware of? Medicam is obviously for pain and inflammation, right?
Yeah.
Prescribed by a vet.
Mhm.
Mm,
The only thing I can think of is one of our vets had prescribed dexamethasone, which is a steroid, previously for a bird with like enlarged goiter. But then I learned from our other vet, steroids aren't really tested in birds, so there's no real,
Yeah.
like we don't know what they do
I don't
exactly.
know if
But
it works.
he totally does not agree with using steroids in birds.
Mhm.
I would possibly make sure that you keep that in the back of your mind if a vet wants to try that.
Try steroids. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then as far, what was the other, you said medicines to keep on hand, and what was the other one? Because I had a response for that. Now I forget.
Medicines to keep on hand, medicines to sort of be cognizant of, like why I mentioned fenbendazole,
Oh, right, yes.
medicines to be aware of.
So my anecdote for that would be enrofloxacin, which is also goes by Baytril. We've started having birds with, a bacterial issue one way or another, but the sensitivity profile always comes back as being resistant. So there might be an overuse of that. I don't know if it's, in other places, but definitely here in the Midwest, a lot of our birds that have had cultures and sensitivities done, enrofloxacin is showing up resistant. So we're having to swap medications.
Okay. So we're seeing antibiotic resistance in birds, not just humans.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the meds that when I was over at Jill's the other day, doctor was talking about having sucralfate on hand because we were concerned if the bird had maybe some kind of GI bleed or GI issue or something. And that I think is something that you can get from Chewy or whatever and have on hand, but it's just a medication that people take that kind of coats. In humans, it coats your stomach, for ulcers. So
that's a good one. As well as the people recommend apple cider vinegar occasionally for, and I can't remember, and we haven't really talked about poop. We haven't had time to talk about different kinds of poop, like bright green poop, and what that might indicate in terms of liver and kidney problems. But there's a lot more to talk about.
Next episode, poop scoop.
Exactly. And people can submit their poop pictures, and we'll give a prize out for the best one. We'll all vote. Seriously. Great. Okay. Anybody else want to ask some questions? I mean, it's been a really good discussion. I feel like we've talked about a lot of different things, and I think I want to make sure that people know that this has been recorded so that they can watch it and learn a lot of things here.
Ellie, may I ask a favor? I just emailed you a screen grab of a pellet versus pigeon food comparison that Adrian did for us. I asked him because I don't understand why the vets are suggesting pellets for pigeons either. I disagree with it. I don't think it's but I don't know. And I mean, I'm not a vet and I don't know why they're saying it. But anyway, it's
pigeon
a
feed chart.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a comparison that Adrian did for us. I'm trying to figure out, what's the benefit of a pellet. And actually pellets are way more expensive.
Are they? Okay, good to know.
Even though feed has gone up insanely.
Yeah.
Pellets even more so.
Well, pellets come from the same thing as it's just that it's been ground up and reformulated, right? It's the same ingredients, basically, same source material. So Winter's Cup is a seed, Harrison is a pellet.
And so are the other two, Supreme and Rowdy Bush. Those are the three pellets that Medical Center for Birds has started recommending for pigeons.
So less protein, more fat. Some have similar, mostly lower fiber, interesting. Moisture, less moisture. And everything else kind of like no vitamin K in one of them. Interesting. Supreme is the only one that has vitamin C. Everything has vitamin D, calcium in most of them, but not all of them. All different forms of calcium. Yeast. I mean, definitely a different nutrition profile in the pellets. I'm surprised that some of them have more fat. And I'm surprised that some of them have much lower fiber. I thought fiber was good for everybody. And much lower moisture. Obviously, it's a pellet, but yeah.
I'm
maybe not making a fat pigeon. I mean, I have got 2 borbs on my hands. So maybe that's it.
I think that can happen
The
either which
obesity
way.
epidemic.
And yeah, I'm unconvinced that pellets are better for pigeons. And pigeons sure love to pick and eat the seed that they want at the moment that they want it. And doves,
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes them happy. What happened to my screen? Oh, I need to stop share. Okay. Okay.
I
That was-
think I wonder if that was the reason that pellets are recommended though. I think it is because birds are picky. So like all the
I think
specs are based
so.
on like, birds
Mhm.
eating all of the seeds, but I think they don't.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but if I wanted to just eat Reese's peanut butter cups and die young, I mean, isn't that okay?
I know, right? Right.
100%, Lisa.
Pigeon freedom. There you go.
But
Yeah.
I do exactly what, because I did the wrong thing for years, and I do exactly what Elizabeth has taught us to do with my pigeons now. And they get their 2 tablespoons in the morning because, and they didn't like to transition to that, but they are so good now. And if they eat everything, then they get a little bit more in the afternoon, and it works. I mean, if you can do it, it works. And they eat everything. That you can eat the brown peas now, you guys. So there you go.
Yeah. What about the doves?
Nope, they don't. They get spoiled.
All right. All right.
That's a problem because all the doves are all together, and so each one has a favorite. So like one of them likes, this seed, one likes, so everything gets eaten, but I don't think that they're really getting a mix. But I mean, like I said, if they want to eat the Reese's peanut butter cups and the other one only wants to eat M&Ms, I'm cool with that.
But Lisa and I both mix finch seed in with our dove mix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
And
it
they get
has-
petamine. Also, they
Right.
get petamine.
Right. And also doves are more prone to experimenting with different vegetables and stuff than
Yeah.
pigeons. Just look at us like we have 3 heads when we try to give them something new.
Mm. Yeah. I
You know
did
what I
do an-
had surprising luck with is chickweed.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Chickweed. Huh.
I had good experience with celery seed. I did an experiment once with my one-sided pigeon, and I would put out bowls for him of each of an individual seed, and I would see which ones he ate. And I think I got celery seed or something like that. And then I have a friend who got a source of hemp seed. And it wasn't a hemp seed that I found myself. So I have to ask him where he got this hemp seed, but my pigeons just love that stuff. So I have to find out where he got it. Special, must be a special kind of hemp, special variety of hemp. Boy, they really loved it. Because I've gotten hemp at my local grocery store, they didn't like it. So yeah, you can do that. You can play around with little bowls, little ramekins, and put different ones in there, see what they eat. Okay. If anyone is interested in seeing anything that I shared today, please let me know. Otherwise, I will stop the recording, stop the program, and thank everybody for coming.
Thank you, Ellie.
All
Thank
right.
you.
My
thank you,
pleasure.
Ellie.
My
Thank
pleasure
you,
for hosting.
everybody. Thank you, Christina and Jill and Lisa and everybody.
Everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.